We have with us today Dennis M. Nally, Global Chairman of PricewaterhouseCoopers International Limited. Welcome, Mr. Denny.
Great to be here, Joe. Thanks.
And, we'll begin with the report itself, the winning leap. That itself signifies what you do intend to convey through the report. It has been pretty fast and pretty comprehensive one done by the global consultancy. So if you could give the highlights of what it means and what led to the decision to have one ready so quickly.
Well, we're very excited about the report. It's been a pretty extensive effort, really going back over the last 6 months or so, comprehensive. For example, we've interviewed over 80 CEOs, not only here in India but outside of India, to really elicit their views. Have worked with a number of individuals as well, looking at different industry sectors, including, I might add, a pretty comprehensive survey within PwC India, where we interviewed 1,500 of our people to sort of get their views on what the future of India might look like. So we're very proud of it. We think it's very comprehensive. We think the timing is right with the new government taking over, to really put forth some ideas, thoughts around what might the next 20 years look like, and what India should really focus on from a prioritization standpoint to really achieve just the outstanding potential that we really think exists for this country. It's very aggressive. The conclusions indicate that in order to really achieve the potential for this country, it needs to grow a 99% average growth over the next 20 years. Pretty significant, pretty ambitious, but when you start to look at what's behind it, we think it's very doable. It requires a different way to think about policies. It requires a different way to think about investment. It requires a lot of engagement with the corporate and private sector, as well as with government, in order to achieve the potential that really exists here. So it's a framework. We put this out as not to say this is the only way to carry things forward, but we hope it's the start of a pretty instructive discussion and dialogue with key leaders across all of India, as to what can be done to really achieve the tremendous potential that exists for this country.
Could you highlight, some of the key sectors which you have identified, which have, in terms of strengths?
Yeah. Well, we've identified 10 in our report, and I really would encourage, people to pick up the report. It's got a lot of information in it, very specific in terms of, how to think about the future. But I tend to really step back and try to focus on the top 3 or 4. What has to be done today to achieve the potential for this country. Remember, 9% growth is the average. So if you're going to achieve 9%, over the next 20 years, you're going to have years that have to be in excess of that 9%. So how do you build this foundation today? And I start with 3 or 4, and I comment on one. Financial services, for example, opening up financial services, making that much more attractive in terms of the potential for the country, the people here, is right at the top of the list. Others, health, the whole area of health in terms of what has to be done to create an environment for a healthy society. Education, really important when you think about the reforms that really need to be put in place to create the workforce of the future, providing them with the skills, capabilities that will allow them to really have an effective role in this economy. And then infrastructure, critical component to early days to really move the country forward in a much more aggressive way. So those would be my top 4. But I tell you, underpinning all of this, to me, is technology. If the country is really going to leapfrog, from where they are today, 5% kind of a growth rate to 9%, technology is a real enabler that really cuts across all of these industry sectors to really drive the kind of potential that exists. So whether In infrastructure, for example, smart cities, how can you use technology to really drive that? You think about education. What are the different ways to think about using technology in a much more innovative way to educate people versus just investing in bricks and buildings, et cetera. And health, clearly technology has a big role to play with, mobile health applications, services, that type of thing. So technology underpins an awful lot of what I'm talking about in terms of driving this. One final comment that when we talk about the report, very interesting, is in order to achieve the kind of growth potential that we're looking at, there clearly needs to be a significant increase in research and development. We see that underpins the whole of what we're talking about, and quite frankly, that has to happen, sooner than later. So today, roughly about 0.8% of GDP is earmarked for R&D, research and development. We think that has to triple to 2.4%, 2.5%, over the next 20 years to really drive the kind of change that and innovation that'll be necessary to transform this economy. So thinking about how you incent businesses, how you incent entrepreneurs to really invest in research and development that will drive that innovative agenda is a very big part of what we're talking about for the longer term.
Have you suggested anything short term for the government, specifically to say that this is what the government needs to do in the short term, because the government thinks in terms of 5 years, and though there is a clear indication that they want to think over a longer term, as Prime Minister Modi had,
Well, I absolutely. Some of the things that the government has done early on in opening up, investment in a number of the sectors, whether it's insurance or others, defense, clearly a step in the right direction. But what's really interesting about the report is this isn't just about the private sector. This is about how government and the private sector really work together to create an environment that's a win-win for everybody. So when you think about what the government can do today, it's really getting on with its reform. How do you make India much easier to do business with? How do you incent foreign direct investment? We think foreign direct investment is a critical enabler to drive the agenda for us. So, ease of investment, ease of doing business, regulatory certainty, which is a big part of it, which is, clarity of regulations, consistency of regulations, a big part of, incenting the right type of investments to be made here. So there's a big role for government to play. There's a big role for the private sector to play. The two working hand in hand together, we think, can drive the type of potential that exists for this country.
Okay, and when you talk about private sector, you are talking about transnational corporations to play a bigger role in developing, in seeing the growth in India really happen. So for that specifically, now 6 months have gone into the new government's regime. Do you think that apart from signals that we have started really seeing things that change in perception?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think early days, but I do think there's been many positive messages that have been delivered internationally that we're talking about a new India, a different way to think about the potential that exists in this country. You're seeing some, early developments, some of which I alluded to, that is giving, the rest of the world confidence that India is changing its way to think about the potential. The mere fact that last week there was an agreement reached between the United States and India to deal with the free trade agreement, I think is clearly a step in the right direction. I'd like to see that closed off and resolved quickly. But nonetheless, I think that's a big step and a very positive step, in the right direction. But this isn't just about, the big international, companies. This is about really, what can the entrepreneurs do here in India? How do you create an environment that really encourages, those smaller and medium-sized companies to really, contribute in a positive way towards the transformation of the country. So how do you incent those companies to make investments? How do you encourage the kind of innovation where, quite frankly, that's where a lot of these great ideas sit today? How do you bubble those up to really drive the economy going forward. So creating that environment is a very important part of it as well. So big companies have a role to play, but the smaller and medium-sized enterprises have a big role to play when you think about the future of this country.
So who will have a critical role to play when it comes to transforming the Make in India slogan into a reality?
I think everyone has a role to play. I think it's governments. I think it's the corporate sector. I think it's the entrepreneurs, and I think all of those have to work together in concert to create an environment that really encourages the kind of transformation that this country has the potential to achieve. And so, as I said, I don't think anyone can do it on their own. I think you're talking about such a significant change, but the potential is so great as well. So having that type of a mindset, we think, is absolutely critical.